It was a bright morning outside Buckingham Palace, and a large crowd had gathered to watch the famous changing of the guard. Tourists were excited, taking pictures and waiting for the ceremony to begin. By the gates, a royal guard stood still and disciplined, his rifle in hand, eyes fixed ahead. He was the picture of tradition, trained to never move, no matter what happened around him. But today, something special was about to happen. Through the crowd, an elderly man slowly made his way forward, leaning on his cane. This was Colonel William Harris, a World War II veteran. His granddaughter walked beside him, offering support as he moved carefully. Despite his age and frailty, he stood tall, his chest covered with medals that told stories of his bravery and sacrifice. The crowd began to notice him, their voices lowering as they watched. Colonel Harris stopped a few feet away from the guard, his eyes full of pride and emotion. Royal guards are trained to stay still, no matter what. But today, this quiet moment of respect was about to change everything. Colonel William Harris wasn't just any man, he was a soldier who had seen the darkest days of war and still found the strength to stand for his country. As a young man during World War II, he had fought in some of the most dangerous battles, putting his life on the line to protect the freedom and values his homeland cherished. He remembered the chaos of those days, the deafening sounds of gunfire, the faces of his comrades, and the overwhelming sense of duty that kept him going. Many of his closest friends never made it back, their laughter and bravery now only memories he carried with him. But even in the bleakest moments, Colonel Harris held on to hope. He often thought of the letter he had received from home, a handwritten note from his mother, encouraging him to stay strong and reminding him of what he was fighting for. That letter had been his anchor, a small piece of love that had kept him grounded amidst the storm. For Harris, the war wasn't just about survival. It was about defending the traditions and values that had shaped his life. Every time he saw the British flag waving in the distance, he reminded himself that he wasn't just fighting for his comrades or his family, he was fighting for the legacy of a nation, for the monarchy that symbolized stability during uncertain times. Now, decades later, Colonel Harris was in his 90s. Life had slowed him down, but his spirit remained unbroken. He had spent years dreaming of visiting Buckingham Palace, a place he saw as a symbol of everything he had fought for, a place that represented the pride and honor of his service. With his granddaughter by his side, helping him every step of the way, this was more than just a visit. She understood how much it meant to him, seeing the respect and determination in his eyes. For Harris, this wasn't just a palace, it was a reminder of the sacrifices he and so many others had made. And today, as he approached the gates, chest adorned with medals and heart full of pride, he was about to experience a moment that would bring his journey full circle. Colonel William Harris stood by the gates of Buckingham Palace, his weathered face filled with pride and emotion. With his chest covered in medals and his granddaughter by his side, he felt the weight of the moment, a lifetime of service and sacrifice leading to this day. As he stood there, he shifted his cane slightly, steadying himself. Slowly, with a trembling hand, he raised a salute to the royal guard standing before him. His hand shook from age, but his resolve was unwavering. It wasn't just a gesture, it was a symbol of respect from one soldier to another. His granddaughter noticed his struggle and gently placed her hand on his arm, helping him maintain his balance. Her eyes glistened as she saw the pride on his face, understanding how much this moment meant to him. The crowd around them began to notice. The chatter and noise softened as people turned their attention to the elderly veteran. Phones were slowly lowered as the significance of the scene became clear. The once bustling group of tourists grew quiet, captivated by the silent tribute unfolding before them. Among them, a young child tugged at their parent's sleeve, pointing at the veteran. "Why is the man in the hat not moving?" they asked in a curious whisper, their eyes darting between the guard and Colonel Harris. The parent leaned down, speaking softly, "Because he's showing respect." The royal guard, disciplined and still, did not flinch. But inside, the sight of the elderly veteran's salute struck a chord, a silent recognition of the sacrifices that had paved the way for the traditions and stability he now represented. The air around them seemed to change, heavy with emotion. This wasn't just a casual moment between a tourist and a ceremonial figure. It was a tribute, a powerful exchange of respect that crossed generations, from one soldier who had defended the nation to another who now stood to protect its heritage. This was more than a salute. It was a reminder of the bravery, sacrifice, and unwavering duty that connected them both. The royal guard stood tall and unmoving, his gaze fixed ahead as his training dictated. His rifle rested firmly in his grip, and every inch of his posture radiated discipline. But as he noticed the elderly veteran's trembling salute and the medals gleaming on his chest, something stirred deep within him. For a moment, he focused on the medals, symbols of courage, sacrifice, and a lifetime of service. This man wasn't just a visitor, he was a soldier, one who had fought for the very traditions the guard now stood to protect. His training told him to stay still, to remain stoic no matter what, but his heart whispered a different command. As the guard stood motionless, his mind wandered briefly to his own connection to service. He thought of his grandfather, who had served in the military decades ago and would often share stories of bravery and camaraderie. Those stories had been an inspiration, planting the seed of duty that led him to this very role. A flash of memory crossed his mind, himself in training, standing in the same uniform, overwhelmed with pride. He had learned then that wearing this uniform meant upholding centuries of tradition. But it also meant something more, honoring those who came before, the soldiers who had made that tradition possible. Now, standing in the presence of this veteran, his chest full of medals, the guard felt the weight of that history pressing on him. His duty was to remain a statue, unflinching and unmoving, but this moment felt different. It wasn't just a gesture of respect from the veteran, it was a message, a bond between two generations of soldiers. For a royal guard, breaking protocol is almost unthinkable, the narrator's voice reflects, but in this moment, tradition and humanity clashed. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see what the guard would do. Inside, his mind was torn between the unyielding rules he had been trained to follow and the overwhelming respect he felt for the man saluting him. In his heart, he knew what he had to do. Something extraordinary was about to happen. The royal guard stood motionless, his mind wrestling between the rules ingrained in him and the deep respect stirring in his heart. For centuries, guards like him had been symbols of unbreakable discipline, tradition, and duty. But as Colonel Harris's trembling salute lingered in the air, something shifted. With a quiet breath, the guard made his decision. In a single, deliberate motion, he stepped forward, breaking centuries of tradition. The crowd collectively gasped, their chatter silenced in an instant. Adjusting his rifle with precision, the guard stood tall and proud. Slowly, he raised his hand to his temple, offering a crisp and perfect salute. The moment hung heavy in the air, the significance of the gesture radiating across the courtyard. A royal guard breaking protocol was almost unheard of, but in this instance, it wasn't a breach of duty, it was an act of profound respect. Colonel Harris, standing with the help of his cane and his granddaughter, froze. His watery eyes widened as he watched the young guard salute him. It was a gesture he had not expected, one that transcended the years and spoke directly to his soul. The veteran's lip quivered as he straightened as much as his frail body would allow. His hand, still shaking from age, returned the salute with all the strength he could muster. Tears welled up in his eyes, and his voice broke as he whispered, "Thank you, soldier." The crowd, witnessing the emotional exchange, seemed to hold its collective breath. Then, slowly, the silence turned into something more, a quiet ripple of applause. One by one, the onlookers began to clap, their admiration and respect filling the courtyard. Some wiped away tears, others simply watched in awe, their phones forgotten in their hands. Colonel Harris's granddaughter stood beside him, overcome with emotion. Her eyes glistened as she gently placed her hand on his arm, steadying him. She whispered, "Grandpa, that was beautiful, her voice trembling with pride. The guard, his salute unwavering, held the moment with a solemn dignity. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. His actions had said everything. When he finally lowered his hand and stepped back into position, his posture was as disciplined as ever. But something in his gaze had softened, a glimmer of humanity beneath the stoic exterior. Colonel Harris gave a faint nod, his heart full as he turned back toward his granddaughter. Though his body was frail, his spirit had never felt stronger. The moment was one he would carry with him for the rest of his days, a salute shared between two soldiers, connected by a bond of service and sacrifice. As the applause grew, the young guard resumed his stillness, his rifle firm, his gaze fixed forward once more. But this time, his presence carried more than tradition, it carried a profound respect for the past and the people who had made his duty possible. The moment of the salute had already left the crowd in awe, but what happened next was even more extraordinary. Breaking tradition further, the royal guard lowered his hand, adjusted his rifle, and took a single step forward. Then, with quiet resolve, he extended his hand to Colonel William Harris. The veteran paused, his eyes widening with surprise, and for a moment, the years seemed to melt away. With trembling fingers, he reached out, gripping the guard's hand firmly but gently. It wasn't just a handshake, it was an unspoken connection, a moment that bridged the decades between their service. The guard leaned in slightly, speaking softly but clearly, "It's an honor, sir." Colonel Harris's grip tightened as his voice, thick with emotion, replied, "The honor is mine. You remind me of the men I served with, brave and true." The words carried weight, not just for the two men, but for everyone watching. The crowd, already captivated by the salute, was now visibly moved. Some wiped away tears, others stood in silence, their phones forgotten as they witnessed a moment of pure respect and humanity. A father in the crowd leaned down to his young son, who had been curiously watching the scene unfold. "This," he said quietly, gesturing to the handshake, "this is what respect looks like." The boy nodded, his eyes wide with wonder, clearly understanding that something important was happening. The handshake lingered for a few seconds longer, a quiet exchange between two men who understood the weight of service and sacrifice. Colonel Harris, with a small, grateful smile, added one final word, "Thank you." The guard straightened, his face still composed but his eyes softer now. He gave a single nod, releasing the veteran's hand and stepping back into position. The connection had been made, and the respect exchanged. The crowd broke into gentle applause, their admiration filling the air. It was a moment no one expected, yet one they would carry with them, a reminder that even in a world bound by tradition, humanity could shine through. Colonel William Harris, with his granddaughter gently supporting him, began to walk back through the crowd. His steps were slow, but his posture was proud. His chest, adorned with medals, seemed to shine even brighter as he moved, the weight of a lifelong dream now replaced by a profound sense of fulfillment. The crowd parted respectfully, their applause softening as they watched him pass. His granddaughter glanced at him, her eyes filled with admiration. "You did it, Grandpa," she whispered, her voice trembling. Colonel Harris gave her a small smile, his pride evident in the way he carried himself. As they reached the edge of the crowd, Harris paused. Slowly, he turned back to the guard. Raising his trembling hand one last time, he saluted again, his face beaming with gratitude and respect. The royal guard, now back in his position, stood motionless, his rifle firm, his gaze forward. He didn't move, but in that moment, he didn't need to. The silent connection between the two men spoke louder than words ever could. The guard's face remained expressionless, as his training demanded, but deep inside, he felt the weight of what had just happened. This moment wasn't about breaking protocol, it was about upholding something far more important. The narrator's voice reflected the significance. In breaking protocol, the guard upheld something far greater, the values of respect, sacrifice, and humanity. For a moment, tradition gave way to honor, and in that, both men found something timeless. As the veteran disappeared into the crowd, the guard resumed his vigil, standing tall and proud by the gates of Buckingham Palace. To the world, he was once again a symbol of discipline and tradition. But within him, the moment had left an indelible mark, a reminder of the sacrifices made by those who came before, and the duty to honor their legacy. The sun shone brightly on the palace as life returned to normal, but for everyone who had witnessed that moment, it was anything but an ordinary day. It was a day when respect and humanity transcended tradition, leaving a memory they would carry forever. As the moment passed, Colonel Harris walked away, surrounded by his family. His granddaughter stayed close by his side, holding his arm, while other relatives followed, their faces filled with admiration and pride. The crowd gradually dispersed, but a quiet reverence lingered in the air. The camera lingers on Colonel Harris one last time. He stops at the edge of the courtyard, turns, and looks back at Buckingham Palace. His eyes, filled with nostalgia, trace the grand gates and the guards standing motionless by them. For him, this wasn't just a place, it was a symbol of everything he had fought to protect. A faint, proud smile crept across his face, and he nodded slightly, as if to say goodbye to a part of his own history. The guard, now back at his post, stood tall once more, rifle in hand, gazing straight ahead. His disciplined stance showed no trace of the extraordinary moment that had just occurred, yet something within him had changed. He was no longer just standing watch, he was carrying forward the legacy of men like Colonel Harris, men who had given everything for their country. The camera pans out, capturing the vast expanse of Buckingham Palace as the sun casts a golden glow over its walls. The voices of tourists return, but for those who witnessed the moment, the day carries a deeper meaning. Moments like these remind us that tradition is not just about standing still, it's about knowing when to move. In breaking protocol, the guard honored something far greater, the courage, sacrifice, and humanity of those who came before.